First steps on the driver's side, I'm just loosening things up so I have room to remove the valve cover. This wiring loom here, you can see battery here. It has two little 10mm bolts that hold it to the inner fender well. Those two right there on the left, that's taken out. This hard line for the air conditioning, this little bracket for it was overlapping to the top of the valve cover. One of the bolts was holding it in there. It's one of those two on the right. And then another one was holding it to that little metal bracket right there. So it went from this clip to that metal bracket I just looked at to this. I undid that bolt too, just so I could move it out of the way more easily. You also want to make sure to remove the PCV hose. It's very simple, I just forgot to film it. You undo that little metal clamp, and I didn't even remove it from the intake side. I just rotated it up and out of the way while I did this job. All right, next, go ahead, remove this little ground wire. It was bolted to this engine lift hook here. That is this bolt right here, another little 10mm. And then moving over to the right a little bit, you can see there's a metal bracket holding on some vacuum lines right here. There's a 10mm on each side, left and right there. I went ahead and undid those, and it was those two little aluminum looking bolts right there. I also went ahead and undid a 12mm bolt right there on top of the intake to free up some slack here. Little stubby guy right there. That's it. So for the sake of making as much room as possible, you can see there's a vacuum line here that goes over the top. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that one. Hopefully it'll just pull straight off. There we go. I'm just gonna fold that back out of the way down here. Some of these you can't undo, some of them are fuel lines and return lines. But getting some of these other vacuum lines out of the way is gonna make this much less of a pain. So here's another one. I'll see if I can separate this with one hand. Give me just a moment. Okay, that one came off easily. It was like this. I went ahead and pulled it out of the way, folded it back. And again, I'm just looking through and seeing what I'll be able to move to get out of the way. Again, this is a fuel line, can't do much about this, but this metal bracket here, it looks like we'll be able to remove. Okay, so I was able to get my little pin tools underneath these metal clasps here and free up this bracket. So I'm just gonna remove that, get it out of the way. And then this little ground wire I also got out. I tried to open up this little metal plastic tab that kept it in place, but it just broke, so I'll replace that with the zip tie later. But again, I can just kind of fold it back here, give us some more room. You can see we're already in much better shape than we were before. All right, next thing I see is I'm looking at this big wiring loom right here, and I'm gonna wanna be able to get it up out of the way. So I went ahead, I got my pick tool. Here's like a 90-degree, and I was able to get it underneath this little tab right here and lift it up, and it looks like that opened up this. There we go. So now we'll be able to lift the loom up more easily and get it out of the way. Okay, next I'm going to work on the 4 coil connectors. This is another time when the loom comes in handy, or not the loom, but the little pick tool comes in handy. It just makes life a lot easier. What I tend to do is get this under here to lift up that little tab very gently. What I'll do is get a flathead here. I don't usually cram it in that far, but I'll hold it up with one hand with the pick, and then with my other hand I'll get a flathead and I'll put it in here, and if I kind of just rotate it, it'll come off just like that. You may be able to just press on the original tab the way it was intended, but I found that that's just not usually very effective. So go ahead and do that with all 4 of these. All right, next you're going to remove the 4 bolts holding in the coil packs. They look like this. I had to use a shorter 10mm socket to get to this very back one, and then once I broke it loose, I was able to get it out with my hand. if you've got a lot of dust and stuff and just dirt accumulated, it's not a bad idea to get a quick vacuum through there. I did just now, didn't make much of a difference, but it's nice to prevent debris from falling into your valve train. Next, I'm going to start loosening the 9 bolts holding in the valve cover. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then down here, you can't see them, is 7, 8, and 9. So I'm going to start off with the extension 10 mil, although I suspect I'll have to use my shorter 10 mil to get to some of the harder to reach bolts. Okay, so I found that mine were almost all hand tight practically. Some of them I didn't even need to break loose. I just, basically with the weight of my hand, was able to free them up with the ratchet wrench, and then if that, and then the rest of them I could do by hand, which I've heard about is kind of common. The only one that was really, the 2 that were kind of a pain is this one right here next to the dipstick. What I did is I just ever so slightly, I just coaxed the dipstick off to the left, and that wasn't really an issue. And then over here, this one at the bottom at the very back, I broke it free with a little 10 millimeter wrench that I was able to get in there. And then once it was able to move my hand, I kind of just moved the wiring loom up out of the way like this, and then I was able to, if I kind of stand at the right angle, I can get my hand down on top of it and either do like this movement or this movement with these 2 fingers, and I was able to get it off without much of an issue. You just want to make sure you don't drop it, but you know, if you do, use your magnet tool. So now we're at the point where we're getting ready to pull the valve cover off. Okay, so I just kind of placed one hand firmly at the base of this filler neck, and then wrap my other hand, just put some pressure on the back of the valve cover, and wiggling it and pulling it, I was able to get it to break free just like this. So what you're going to want to do now is, I'm just holding my phone so I'm not able to film easily, but I'm going to probably hang on to the valve cover or through the oil filler neck here with my left hand, and then I'm going to use my right hand to hold things out of the way, like the wiring loom or the fuel line, and I'm going to now pull it up and kind of bring it up and out to the left. Okay, fairly simple. I had to kind of just maneuver it back and forth and lift it up and lift it sideways, but I was able to get it. What I'm going to do next is I am going to work on removing some of this upper gunk here. And the way I'm going to do that is I have my narrow vacuum nozzle, and I'm going to hold it right next to my little scraper tool while I scrape everything off, it'll just get sucked right up into the vacuum, because you just want to minimize the amount of stuff that you have falling into this area. You know, little bits and pieces won't hurt, but just the less the better. Okay, so what I just spent a few minutes doing, and what you'll want to do as well, is I had a little rag here, and I wiped around the perimeter of where the valve gasket or valve cover gasket sits. You just want to make sure there's no dirt there, and then before we finally put the valve cover back on, we'll do one more wipe down. There's little corners here. There was a little bit of like seal packing stuff, like this original Toyota sealant, and we'll reapply some when we put the valve cover back on, but it was right in here, and I just got my little pick tool and I was able to get it all out, and I made sure I had the vacuum on standby just to make sure I got it out. I did a pretty good job. There's still a little bit left there, but I'm satisfied with it. This underside was a little bit more difficult. I kind of just had to, you know, do my best dentist impersonation and feel it out with my scraper tool to make sure there was no more of that soft seal packing stuff left, but just get it as clean as you can. Next thing we're going to do is, you have these 2 little half moons back there. That's what they're called. They're from the machining process. They had to leave these little holes and then they fill them in. So if you just get a pair of pliers or like small channel locks and bite onto the tops of them, give them a little bit of a wiggle while you pull, and they should pop right out for you. Okay, this is what they look like. Again, little half moons. You're gonna wanna make sure you get all of the sealant off of the bottom side of it. Works well if you have a little wire brush. You can just brush it all down. And then of course, all the seal packing stuff that's left where they used to be sitting, you will want to scrape that out too. So, you know, a combination of scraper tools like I was using, and what I had actually done as well is I had a little sponge for the other side, like the scrubby side of a sponge, and I just ran it back and forth with my finger, and that got some of the final residue out. It takes a little bit of elbow grease, mostly just because it's hard to reach, but you'll be able to get it done. And if you're able to, try to remember where each of these came from, just because they're like knockouts from the machining process. So they, you know, with the seal packing that we'll replace, it probably doesn't make a difference, but each one has a spot that they fit perfectly in. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I'm happy with that. I got the half moons all cleaned up. And then back there, I used a combination of my pick tools and also just a little detailing scrub brush to kind of scrub while I vacuumed as well. And I managed to not drop anything noticeable down there through the oil passage. So next we're going to move on to getting the valve covers ready for reinstallation. Okay, here's our valve cover. I've already done it with these three, but what you're going to want to do is get a flat head and just get it so it's underneath the lip here, and you can twist it back and forth. I'll do it with one hand. Twist it back and forth to get it so it starts to pry up for you, just to get it started. It's the way I've been doing it. And then, to get the rest of the way, grab a pair of pliers, get a good grip and just bend it back. Just like that. And you're gonna do that for all 4 tabs here. All right, now this is where you'd use a seal puller if you had one, but I don't, so you just need to be careful with the flathead. Right around one of these corners, not right where the tab is that you bent up, but somewhere else. Work your screwdriver in between the corner of the seal and the metal there. And you're going to lightly tap the back of it just until the screwdriver is made its way into the seal a little bit, and you can begin to pry it out. There you go, I got it the rest of the way. And these old seals, they don't bend, they just crack and fall apart. So just gently pry it out, and you can see it does a little bit of damage up here to the top, but the inner lining where the seal sits is in pretty good shape. Shouldn't leak for you. So that's how you get these old ones out. All right, next thing I'm going to do is get ready to install these new seals. One thing you can do to make life a little bit easier, just get a little bit of motor oil and just kind of coat the outside of it and just slide it right into place. Go ahead and do that for all 4. And once you have those all placed, go ahead and just get a hammer and very gently smack down the tabs. Just like that on all of them to hold these new seals in place. All right, it's not the prettiest thing, but they're all in. Next thing you're gonna do is my kit that I got, which ultimately I decided I would recommend the OEM Toyota stuff, but the Fel-Pro will work. My kit came with these little grommets, and these are the ones that go on top of they're the washers for the valve cover bolts. And the way that I found works to get them off is I use pliers and I bite down onto the washer like this, and then I get my impact gun and I just unscrew it while I'm holding the washer in place with the pliers. All right, I went ahead and laid in my new gasket as well. Pretty simple. It has a little bit of a groove to kind of hold it into place. It doesn't have like a definitive snap or anything like that, but just work it around in a circle, pinch it together with the valve cover, and it'll stay in place for you. Okay, getting ready to reassemble. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna get my little half moons here, and I'm gonna run a bead of my Permatex gray. Ideally, you'd use Toyota FIPG or whatever packaging stuff they use, but it's what I've got on hand and it's worked in my experience. Just run a little bead around here in the middle and then snug it into place. This might be a little bit excessive, but not really a big deal. You can push it down. If any splooges out on the sides, you can just kind of wipe it over the top of it. I'll show you when I'm done. So there you go. It's in place. And you can see there was a little extra on top that I just ended up wiping over the top. No big deal. I'm gonna do the second one now. Okay, you can see both those little half moons are snugged in there. Next, I'm going to put some the same stuff right there in that nook, there in that corner. I'm gonna try and put it down so that it's right here on the bottom, and I'm gonna bring it up around the top here. And you don't need a lot, just a nice thin smearing of it to cover this little corner there where oil is prone to leak. Okay, so in this video I have the valve cover sat squarely into place. Reinstallation, or putting it back into place, is fairly straightforward. What I did is I had my left hand on the oil filler neck, and then I used my right hand to guide the valve cover into place and to move other lines out of the way. The issue that I ran into that might be specific to this Felpro kit is those little blue grommets that fit around those metal spark plug tubes. They were just barely big enough to actually fit around those tubes. And so once I had the valve cover sitting squarely in place, it was about 1/4 of an inch too high. Again, just because those metal cylinders that the spark plugs sit in couldn't advance through those blue grommets. So what I ended up doing is I had my little pick tool, and I was able to delicately put it in between the outer perimeter of that spark plug tube and in between that tube and the blue grommet, and I just gently ran it in a circle on each one, and that sort of popped the lip of that blue grommet up and over that spark plug tube. And once that was done on all 4 of them, I was able to really nicely push the valve cover down into place. And once that was done, I went ahead and just threaded the valve cover bolts in just by hand for now to get it started. Okay, so I went ahead and finished installing the valve cover. I used my 10 millimeter socket, and I went around those 9 bolts in a star pattern. And the goal of that is just to make sure that you are putting even pressure on all sides of the valve cover. So I went around progressively just until they all began to become snug. The torque spec for these bolts is about 53 inch-pounds. I don't have a torque wrench that actually goes that low, but my experience with valve cover gaskets and trying to get in the ballpark of that 53 inch-pounds is I get to the point where all of the bolts are evenly snug, to the point where I start to feel actual resistance among all of them. And then from there, I tighten them to the point where only using the force of my wrist on the ratchet are they getting tight, right? So if you start to get your arm or your elbow involved, you can kind of keep cranking these things down. You don't want to go that far. You can imagine that if you just have your hand on the handle of the ratchet and all you're using is the strength of your wrist, within reason, you can go ahead and tighten it down that way. And that'll get you about where you need to be for the torque of these bolts. You won't do too much harm by over tightening them a little bit. If anything, you might just crush that little grommet, so you don't want to go quite to that point. But again, on the other end, if you don't make them tight enough, they're fairly easy to get to, just to make sure they're extra snug. So it doesn't hurt to come back to this, a week or so later or a few thousand miles later and make sure everything's tight, and just get eyes on it every now and then and make sure that you're not leaking new oil. And then beyond that, reassembling all the vacuum lines and everything, I didn't film it because I just looked back at the own videos that I took earlier in the day just to make sure that I had everything in place. Fortunately, there's not too much hardware and it's pretty straightforward. If I wasn't filming, the total labor of this job was probably only about 45 minutes.